Hello, my name is Dr. Emily Horowitz. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm going to be giving a talk today called The Impermanence of the Past, MDMA-Assisted Psychotherapy for PTSD and Veterans. So I've been a clinical psychologist for quite a while now, and I've worked at the Manhattan VA for about 14 years. I also have a private psychotherapy practice, and I also work as a study therapist on MAPS Phase 3 trial of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. Additionally, along with some other wonderful people that I work with on the MAPS trial, I'm a co-founder of Nautilus Sanctuary, which is a nonprofit center for psychedelic medicine in New York City, where we hope to develop a special veterans program to obtain grant funding to make these treatments available to veterans. And it's my hope that one day the VA will also be able to provide MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. And I know this is actually slowly becoming a reality at the Bronx VA, thanks to Dr. Rachel Yehuda, who is working to get a program underway now. So today I'm going to talk about how MDMA can treat PTSD, and in particular veterans with PTSD. As I will discuss, past traumas can feel like they're still very much happening in the present for people with PTSD. The past is very real and very present in the here and now. The MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is an incredible tool to help shift the way that traumatic events are experienced, thereby making the past, in a sense, impermanent. As part of my work on the MAPS trial, I was able to work with an Afghanistan war veteran on the open label trial, which is where all participants were given MDMA. There was no placebo. But unfortunately, since the research is ongoing, I'm not permitted to discuss any cases at this time. So not going to be able to talk about specific cases today, but it was a very successful treatment in that particular case. That's all I'll tell you for now. So veterans issues are something that is really close to my heart. In fact, I became a psychologist specifically so that I could work with veterans and help to heal war trauma. It's a weird story, but when I was about 15 years old, I was homesick from school one day, and I guess I was bored and was looking through my dad's VHS collection, and I saw Platoon on the shelf. My dad had actually borrowed that film from a friend of his who was a Vietnam vet. So I popped in Platoon into the VHS player and was really completely blown away by that film, and I was deeply, deeply moved. Additionally, there was another film there called Born on the 4th of July, which is another amazing film. Both of them are actually by Oliver Stone. Oliver Stone actually is a Vietnam veteran himself and made an amazing trilogy of Vietnam films: Platoon, Born on the 4th of July, and a less well-known film called Heaven and Earth. I highly recommend all three films if you're interested in checking them out. Born on the 4th of July is a true story about a veteran named Ron Kovic, who was actually born on the 4th of July. He's played by Tom Cruise in the film, arguably his best role. Ron lost his legs in Vietnam and then returns back to the U.S. from after the war and joins the Vietnam Veterans Against the War movement. So he struggles with PTSD after coming back to the United States. And he does have a very traumatic homecoming as well. I don't know about you, but in my high school, they didn't teach us about the Vietnam War. They really didn't cover it at all. I really knew hardly anything about it. My heart just broke for the veterans who, at 18 years old, were only a few years older than I was at the time. They were just beginning their lives, and they had to experience this tremendous trauma in a really hostile and brutal war zone. And then they suffered more trauma when they returned home, where they should have been honored and respected when they returned back. They instead were spat on and called names like baby killers. One Vietnam veteran that I know told me that the returning home trauma was actually worse than the combat trauma because he felt so betrayed by the people he was fighting for. This really upset me. And from that moment on, I became a little bit obsessed with the Vietnam War and decided to dedicate my life to helping heal war trauma. So here I am, working at the VA for 14 years. I'm still there. So as a teen, I would actually hang out at my local VFW. Yeah, it was weird. I would love to listen to their war stories and to get to know them. And I also helped to raise some money for the New Jersey Vietnam Veterans Memorial. I would stand outside my local supermarket with a can of coins, collecting coins. And I was also, really just obsessed with that whole era of history. The 60s counterculture hippie movement, just incredible ideas, music, art, and of course, psychedelics. I always felt like I was born too late, but I guess in retrospect, I was actually born right on time, because now these powerful tools are actually enjoying a scientific renaissance, which is very exciting. So what is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder? Well, it's a mental health disorder that affects about 8 million Americans per year. About 8% of civilians can develop PTSD after experiencing or witnessing a traumatic event, such as rape, sexual abuse, childhood abuse, natural disasters, violence, terrorism, etc., car accidents. 60% of men and 50% of women will experience at least one trauma in their lifetime. Percentages are even higher for veterans than other groups, ranging between 12 and 20% for combat veterans, with the highest numbers, about 20%, from the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Unfortunately, there is no shortage of trauma in our world, that is for sure. So we do need ways to heal these things. So symptoms of PTSD include recurrent intrusive thoughts, nightmares or flashbacks, which is feeling like the trauma is still happening in the present moment, like I said before. Dissociation, feeling disconnected from the world around you, from the people around you, from your own thoughts and feelings, or from the person you thought you were before or knew yourself as before the trauma. Hypervigilance, which is a heightened state of being super aware of your surroundings. Increased startle response, which is jumping, for instance, when you hear a loud noise. Avoidance of things that are reminders of the trauma and avoiding talking or thinking about the trauma. Feeling detached and estranged from others. Emotional numbing, not being able to feel your feelings. Anger, irritability, and rage are common. Depression, sleep problems, concentration problems, survivor's guilt. PTSD can also lead to other problems, including relationship problems, drug and alcohol abuse, and suicidality. We know that suicide rates in veterans is 1.5 times higher than in the general population. An average of 20 veterans commit suicide per day. That's insane. Common treatments for PTSD typically include medications like antidepressants. Zoloft and Paxil are particularly popular and approved by the FDA for treatment of PTSD, and or psychotherapy, of course, including exposure therapy and cognitive processing therapy, which are both cognitive behavioral therapies. But typically, medication and or psychotherapy only have about a 50% efficacy rate. The current treatments are simply not sufficient. If you can heal the symptoms but not affect the cause, it's quite a bit like trying to heal the gunshot wound with gauze. We need to go to the root in order to really heal it, not just medicate and take care of symptoms, which is important too, but we need to go to the cause. In 2017, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy was designated a breakthrough therapy by the FDA. What that means is that the FDA believes that it may prove more beneficial than current treatments. MAPS is currently about halfway through their phase 3 trials, which is the last phase before it can become a legalized medicine. In their phase 2 trial, 56% of participants no longer met criteria for PTSD 2 months post-treatment, and 68% no longer had PTSD symptoms a year later. These numbers are significantly higher than other PTSD treatments. So what is MDMA? MDMA stands for methylene dioxymethamphetamine. It's also known as ecstasy or Molly, and it was first synthesized in 1912 by a German chemist, Anton Kolich, to be used as a blood clotting agent. And it was studied in the 50s by the US military, and synthesized again in the 1960s by chemist Sasha Shulgin, who is credited with introducing it to therapists in the 1970s. Therapists began using it as a therapeutic tool in the 70s and 80s, especially for couples therapy. Underground therapists have continued to use it since then. But in the 80s, unfortunately, MDMA became a popular rave or party drug, and it became outlawed in the United States in 1985 after being classified a Schedule I substance, which means that it has a high potential for abuse and no real medicinal value. Of course, that is now being shown otherwise, so hopefully one day it will be reclassified. We are now in a psychedelic renaissance. It's been, MDMA is being researched again, along with other psychedelics like psilocybin, ayahuasca, LSD, and others, and is showing really great promise. MDMA releases serotonin and other neurotransmitters into the brain and can increase compassion and empathy, enhance communication, trust, openness, and introspection. It helps reduce psychological defenses, fear of emotional pain, hyperarousal, anxiety, fear, and avoidance. It therefore seems to be an incredible psychotherapy tool as it helps put people in a state of emotional safety, which then allows them to feel safe enough to start to process and deal with their traumatic memories without feeling overwhelmed. One of my mentors introduced me to the work of an Irish psychiatrist who's now in his 90s, I think. His name is Dr. Ivor Brown. I recommend checking out his work if you're interested. But he believes that trauma is a, quote, inexperienced experience. What that means is that when a person experiences something traumatic, it's not fully experienced at the time of the trauma. We know that a lot of people will say that they dissociate during a traumatic event. Like if a rape victim may say, I could see myself from above, they leave their body. So this is something that happens to survive a trauma. People aren't able to fully be in it because it's overwhelming. A lot happens in the brain as well, and in the nervous system when there's a trauma. Of course, there's the fight or flight that kicks in, various stress hormones kick in. All these things are designed to help a human survive a stressful event. And combat in particular is extremely traumatic. Soldiers are unable to process their traumas because they need to maintain a hardness and a certain level of detachment in order to continue surviving in an intense and dangerous war zone. Also, the culture of the military still unfortunately sees mental health issues as a weakness. It values toughness, hardness, and considers those a badge of honor, and even encouraged. So it makes it particularly hard for veterans, especially while they're still in a war zone or in a combat zone, to deal with their trauma. And even afterwards when they return home, because there's so much stigma, unfortunately. Because of these innate survival mechanisms, memories of traumatic events can often be fragmented, suppressed, and otherwise not fully experienced in the psyche. Because they are not fully experienced, the traumatic experience becomes frozen in the present, and it feels as if it's still happening now in the present moment. Only after fully experiencing it and its resulting emotions can the experience move into the past and become, in a sense, impermanent. Trauma work involves allowing the trauma or the inexperienced experience that is stuck in the, quote, frozen present to become a memory of the past. Processing the trauma allows it to shift into memory. Traumas are not erased, but rather they are integrated into memories, allowing the person to see the trauma more accurately and fully. And MDMA is a wonderful tool to allow this process to unfold because it helps the person to feel safe, open, and trusting enough to confront the traumatic event that they've been avoiding. It also helps foster a strong therapeutic relationship between the participant and the therapist. Therapeutic alliance has been found to actually be the #1 factor in successful psychotherapy. More than any specific technique or type of therapy is the therapeutic alliance. MDMA can help establish a more trusting, open, and loving relationship between the participant and the therapist. MDMA also helps to open the heart to love and connection, which is something that has been particularly shattered in people who have PTSD, as they often feel disconnected, isolated, alone, guilty, and emotionally numb. Connection is so incredibly important. And being able to trust one's therapist is really crucial in trauma work. In the phase 3 trials, participants are actually treated by a pair of therapists, typically a male and a female, and they're given a total of 3 medicine-assisted, 8-hour psychotherapy sessions. In phase 3, it's actually double-blind, so 50% of the participants are getting MDMA and 50% are getting a placebo. It's double-blind, meaning that participant and therapist don't know what they're getting. They also get a total of 12 90-minute prep and integration psychotherapy sessions, which are punctuated in between each dosing session. So for instance, they get 3 prep sessions followed by their first dosing session, followed by 3 more integration sessions, followed by another dosing session, 3 more integration sessions, etc. The integration sessions are very important as well. I'm not really going to get into that today, but integration work is, I think, actually more important than the actual MDMA work itself. So the dosing session itself, it lasts about 8 hours, and it alternates between periods of inner-focused patient introspection where they're going inside themselves, and also periods of therapeutic interaction with the therapists where they're processing and talking about what's coming up. Participants are encouraged to connect with their inner healing intelligence or inner healer. Another way to think about that is your higher self, your inner wisdom, your intuition, and to help that inner healer helps to guide them through the traumatic memories. The inner healer actually becomes the participant's ally, their center, their essence, as they begin to see, acknowledge, feel, and listen to different parts of their self and to work to integrate them into wholeness. We are all multidimensional beings, and we have multiple parts within us. Often these parts have been split off or unseen or unheard and need to be integrated. And MDMA can really help us access those different parts. Participants can talk about their traumatic events without being overwhelmed by emotional intensity, fear, anxiety, or avoidance. In fact, they will very often comment at how surprised they are that they can talk about such incredibly painful material with ease and calm. They can begin finally to see and experience their trauma more fully, and then begin to find understanding and make meaning in their suffering. And then what happens is the trauma memory moves from the frozen present into the past. MDMA can also help them be more compassionate with themselves and others. MDMA is a very loving and gentle and compassionate medicine. I believe it actually teaches us and shows us how to be more gentle, compassionate, and loving with ourselves and with others, because it gives us an experience or a blueprint of how this feels. And I actually think this is one of the most important things that MDMA can teach us as humans, because we're often just so hard on ourselves. And this medicine just helps teach us how to be more gentle and compassionate, which we all need more of and the world needs more of, in my opinion. So as I mentioned before, rates of PTSD following war trauma and combat are typically higher than rates of PTSD from other types of trauma. War trauma is particularly challenging to heal in our Western society. Soldiers take on the extremely difficult and complex work of serving and protecting the nation, our community, and its ideals by engaging in combat and other dangerous work in military service. In Native American societies, warriors were deeply respected and honored. Before returning to their tribe after battle, warriors would first cleanse themselves with sweat lodge and ceremony, and only after that would they return to rejoin their community. And they would then tell their battle stories to their community. The tribe acted as a sacred witness to honor their sacrifices, to share the burden, and to welcome them back into the community. Our Western society does not do this. After Vietnam, we spat on them. We called them baby killers. We all say that we support our troops, we hang the yellow ribbons, but in reality, we are really split off from truly and fully understanding what they go through on our behalf. Telling one's story to a sacred witness can be incredibly healing. Now in our society, therapists are the ones who are the sacred witnesses. All people who have survived trauma, and in particular veterans, need and deserve a sacred witness to hear their stories and share their burden. This seemingly simple act helps empower them and helps them process and experience their traumas more fully because they are not carrying it alone. If you're interested in learning more about this, I would highly recommend the book. It's called War and the Soul by Ed Tick, who's a psychologist. Ed and his wife began an organization that they call Soldier's Heart, which was actually the original name for PTSD back after the First World War. It was started. They called it Soldier's Heart instead of PTSD, which came actually after the Vietnam War. So Soldier's Heart, the organization, holds healing retreats for veterans and civilians where sacred witnessing is central to the healing process. I was actually really blessed to attend one of their women's retreats a few years ago, and it was a humbling and powerful experience to act as a sacred civilian witness. So I highly recommend you check them out. Well, we cannot deny that humanity is currently in a dark night of the soul. We've got the pandemic, we have wars, we have rampant abuse and corruption, we have climate emergency, and in my opinion, the most important thing that we can offer the world is to heal ourselves. While MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is certainly not a magic pill, and it's certainly not for everyone, I believe it does have a lot to offer humanity, especially in this critical time. If you're interested in how psychedelic medicines can help veterans with PTSD, I will highly recommend something else to you, which is a award-winning documentary film called From Shock to Awe. It follows 3 Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans with PTSD who are helped profoundly and movingly by ayahuasca and MDMA. I actually think this is the best film I've ever seen about PTSD and the best film I've ever seen about psychedelics. And then combined, it's just off the charts incredible, this film. It's available to be rented online. I was able to screen it at the Manhattan and Brooklyn VAs, where it received a really positive reception. And it's also been screened at the San Francisco VA. So to conclude, I would like to first salute all the brave souls, especially our warriors, our soldiers, and our veterans who are courageous enough to do the difficult, profound, and deep work to heal themselves so that they can be free to live life more joyfully, lovingly, and freely as we all truly deserve to live. The effects of trauma and the trauma of the past can become impermanent. And like I said, MDMA is not for everyone, but it has a lot to offer. And I just want to thank you for listening to my talk today.
Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for your amazing work, working with people, which is pretty much everyone who is confronting the traumas that are experienced today and through generations even has compiled in our bodies, in our psyches, in our collective societies. It's such a huge task. I really appreciate everything that you're doing. Listening to your talk, there's this thought that strikes me that as the Arctic melts, there's a correspondent kind of hardening, freezing in our hearts, which is part of the cost. But in this case, phenomenologically speaking, at least there are these agents, there are these medicines that allow a kind of thawing where impermanence is possible. It's something that we appreciate just in the reality of what we're living through. uh, how is it that you're finding on the ground and working with people directly, so personally, that the thawing begins?
It's a really good question, and I love that analogy to what our planet is going through right now. And it's true, it is a melting, so to speak, that we all kind of need to go through right now. I think especially our Western society, being that we're so separated from each other, the connection needs to happen, right? And I think in order to first start to melt and open the heart and begin that healing process, we need to feel connection, or at least feel safety with a connection that feels safe to explore that. But generally, it comes from really hitting a place within oneself of, I don't want to live this way anymore. And hopefully, it doesn't go to the suicide route, but when people are suffering enough, they want to help themselves and heal. And I think, just now with everything we're going through on this planet, just politically and environmentally, and just everything, I think so much is coming to light, coming to the surface to be healed. So I think it's great timing that these medicines are being studied now and becoming available more and more for people to start that process.
Yeah, it's certainly an exciting moment that I think many of us weren't necessarily sure would happen in our lifetimes. It hasn't happened yet, but it seems like we really are on the precipice of being able to offer such an incredible new kind of setting for this kind of traumatic healing to actually happen on a much different scale and a much different kind of approach, right? It's a totally new venue for psychologists like yourself.
That is true. I mean, and I just want to acknowledge and share my gratitude for all the people who came before us, right? All the indigenous healers that used different medicines, and even the elders in the psychedelic community who have been doing this work, especially the underground therapists, for many, many years, and bringing this forward so that we can now learn to work with them. So yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. In terms of you had me thinking about the case of suicide and that it is so prevalent, as well as beyond that, of course. Let's say the thought of it is of course on a prevalence of a much bigger scale, right? In terms of turning towards annihilation, a turning towards self-destruction, how is it that when you encounter that actually, I'd love to hear just how you have encountered it on your own terms in your work, but also how it is that you start to kind of turn people back or open up new pathway towards something other than that as a seemingly best option, right? Because it becomes this feedback loop, kind of as Michael was talking. It becomes this aspect of, well, this seems to be my best option or my only option. It progresses into this kind of neuroses where it becomes very difficult to step through, break through, open up something else that has a realistic potential of supplanting that thought or that thought process.
Yeah, I mean, if I knew the direct answer to that, I'd probably be really wealthy. But I
Well, but
mean,
I feel like you must encounter it in terms of clients, in terms of people you work with. Yeah, the
yeah, of
reality of
course,
it.
very, very, very depressed people who are thinking about suicide. And I don't think it's helpful to tell them, don't do that. I mean, it doesn't really work. I think we need to validate where they're at and acknowledge that the pain that they're in, but then at the same time trying to give them some sense of hope that things can and will get better. And that's tricky. That's really hard, and that's an art, I guess, within itself, of sort of being the light bearer or the light holder while the other person isn't able to be in that place. But at the same time, validating and being with them through through their hard times too, and through their hopelessness, because that is valid. And I think many of us have been in dark places before. And I think especially now looking around, like I keep saying, with the world and the place it's in, it's hard not to feel hopeless sometimes. So I think those states are valid. But yeah, we don't want people taking their lives and not giving themselves that opportunity to heal that or see the light or find a way to come back home to themselves. But yeah, it's a tricky balance.
Yeah, it seems to me that feelings or thoughts of hopelessness are completely realistic for most of us, that there is a kind of futility to so much of our position. The immobilization of lockdown, for instance, during pandemic, inspires a kind of hopelessness in many cases. Personally, I've learned from meditation to be that voice of kind of acknowledgement, but then also accepting that it's happening and providing a kind of rebound thought, or proposing something that takes me back to the breath, let's say, in meditation. But that the specter of thoughtlessness, that negative thoughts are not going to come through, is also unrealistic. In this case of the kind of like suicidal psyche, it's this amplification of that, though, where it seems like at least we are waking up to the reality that we do have tools to help people, that we have technology or medicine or however people in the research community are thinking and talking about psychedelics at this point, that these agents are in fact efficacious, are effective at breaking through these thought patterns that can be completely overwhelming. And as you say, lock people out of themselves because they are living in an unrealized past, or they haven't dealt with the past, they haven't come through the experience. So you're seeing that, as you were saying in the integration work, this actually brings people into the long-term benefits in a big way too. Yes?
Oh, absolutely. If we could all live in the MDMA state all the time, that would be nice, but it's not realistic, right? We can't.
It's a lot to take on too.
That's true. That would be a lot to take on. But yeah, I think it's really important. What are you going to bring back from that experience into your life? A lot can happen in an MDMA session. A lot of material can be covered in an MDMA session. So it can actually take a lot of work to kind of tease apart all those downloads, all that processing, all that information. That takes work. And yeah, how are you going to bring those changes, those new ideas, so to speak, those breakthroughs into your life? That's, in my opinion, the real work. The MDMA session itself is work as well, but that's really important, the integration piece. Really,
how do you help
important.
people find those gems and kind of apply it or take it forward? Are there particular techniques?
The gems, people, when people are in their sessions with MDMA, they speak beautiful things. Some amazing gems come out of them. It's such an honor to sit with people in those sessions, because it's like, wow, like I always learn stuff and feel like I could apply a lot of what they're talking about to my own life and to my other patients as well. But I usually write them down, because sometimes people can't remember everything that happens in the session. So having notes and having especially really these gems of important things that people say written down, for them to go back and look at later, I think is really important. And then in the integration sessions, those are fleshed out some more, because we're talking about them in a different state of consciousness. So yeah,
that must be amazing to sit with different people, as well as to just see them find their way towards the confrontations of the things that they're afraid of or have been disconnected from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just amazing how, I mean, I mentioned in my talk, but it's like almost every single person will say, I can't believe that I'm talking about this right now, and I don't feel scared or I don't feel like I need to run from it. I can just talk about it calmly, and it's one of the most horrific memories that I've ever had. It's just truly astounding. Um, so that's just, I think, one of the best things about MDMA. Because when you're avoiding a trauma, it's not getting healed because you're just avoiding, avoiding, avoiding. And I don't think people necessarily have to have a very clear memory where they relive the trauma 100%, but there's some piece of information that they need to recover in order to heal it. And it helps. It really helps people not be afraid to
Has
get
has
information.
this work helped you as well? Has this work changed you?
Um, Professionally speaking, you mean, or personally?
I
I will.
I guess I mean both. I mean either or both.
Yeah, I mean, as part of the MAPS training to become an MDMA therapist, I was actually given an opportunity to have an MDMA session with two therapists, two MAPS therapists. So I got to see firsthand what it's like to be on the other side of the couch, and that was also a beautiful experience for me as well. But yeah, as a therapist, I mean, it's just such an amazing tool. It just fast tracks the healing process in huge ways. And it's there's something really special about sharing that kind of space with another person. 8 hours is a long time, and that's way longer than most therapy sessions, which are less than an hour. So you're spending 8 hours, plus all the other sessions. You're really getting to share. It's basically like sharing, I feel, sacred space with another person, and it's a real privilege and an honor to be able to, like I said, be the sacred witness to people's lives and people's experiences. And it's amazing. It's very
Well,
powerful.
thank you so much, and thanks for being the vanguard of this therapeutic work. And I'm sure many will learn from you how it's done, and you'll pass it on, and there'll be a lot more healing to come.
Oh, for sure,
So
it's like a ripple effect. That's going to, and even the people who have gone through the treatments and are doing better and able to go forth into the world and be who were meant to be, without the trauma holding them back. I mean, that's the best outcome of all of this. It's like, I kind of look at it like, I don't know if you know that Tears of Fear song, "Sowing the Seeds of Love." It's a great song, but I feel like that's kind of what we're doing. Like, we are reconnecting people to their own selves and to who they really are, and they can then go out into the world and share their gifts, and that just ripples out, and that's the best part to me of what we're doing.